On this episode of Women Behind Bars, one woman is convicted of murdering her millionaire husband.
The first jewelry he gave me was like a 3-carat diamond ring and a 42 diamond cocktail ring.
I can see him laying in bed. He's got a phone in his hand, it's covered in blood, and he's literally holding his intestines in his hand.
Then, Bernice Ahrens tells her story. She was an alleged accomplice in the fatal beating of a man held captive in her home.
They administered their beating of him, including pouring ammonia or bleach in his wounds.
All I know is that one day I went to work and I came home but he's dead.
2 women, 2 brutal crimes. These are the stories of Celeste Johnson and Bernice Ahrens. In the early hours of October 2nd, 1999, a deputy responded to a frantic 911 call originating from the home of aging multimillionaire Stephen Beard and his wife, Celeste.
Hello?
Do you need an ambulance?
I need an ambulance, hurry.
He said that he's woken up in the middle of the night and his intestines are in his hands. I believe the term he used was guts have blown out.
It first appeared to be a medical emergency. However, it was soon apparent that someone had tried to murder Stephen Beard.
It was clear that he had been shot that night.
The hunt for the shooter eventually led to the arrest of a mentally unstable woman named Tracy Tarleton, who was a friend of Stephen's wife, Celeste.
Tracy fell madly in love with Celeste.
Tracy Tarleton was trying to eliminate the competition by eliminating Celeste's husband.
Was Celeste Johnson behind a cruel plot to get rid of her husband for his fortune? Or did she take the fall for a woman who wanted Celeste all to herself?
I grew up in Southern California. I was a few days old when I was adopted.
Celeste was one of 4 children to be adopted by Edwin and Nancy Johnson. The family lived in a quiet suburb about an hour north of Los Angeles, California.
I went to private schools, and my life was real structured as far as school and swim team, but our home life was very crazy.
She was a very bright, precocious, beautiful child, but she had this kind of dark side too, where she would just go off on her brothers, and her mother did take her in for psychiatric treatment, but it didn't seem to actually help.
By the time Celeste reached high school, her parents had divorced, and the financial strain forced the top student to enroll in public school.
Suddenly I'm thrown into this new environment. All these people have all these freedoms that I never experienced. So when I was about 14 or 15, I got involved with Craig, who happened to live right around the corner.
At 17, Craig Bratcher was 2 years older than Celeste, and according to Celeste, their relationship was dysfunctional from the very start.
He would have me come over like at 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and he would have sex with me, and then in the morning I would clean his house, and I thought that was love.
When Celeste was 17, she gave birth to twin girls, Christina and Jennifer, fathered by Craig. The twins were born several months early.
They were in the incubator for a few months, and at first I couldn't even take them out or touch them or anything, so I think we never really bonded.
Celeste describes her eventual marriage to Craig as on again, off again, and highly volatile. Crime writer Catherine Casey spent over a year researching the murder. She uncovered records and spoke to the Beards' friends and family members. According to Casey, more than anything else, Celeste dreamed of a different life.
Celeste saw herself as being entitled to more in life, and Craig didn't make a lot of money. She needed that in her life. She needed money.
By 1988, Celeste had left Craig. She would ultimately be married 5 times, but claimed that her kids were her primary concern.
If the person I married couldn't get along with my kids, then I just left them.
But records uncovered by Catherine Casey paint a picture of Celeste's kids spending months at a time in the custody of people other than their mother.
She was reported for leaving the kids home alone. She dropped them off at foster homes from early ages on when they became inconvenient for her.
In 1990, when the girls were 10, Celeste gave up custody and sent them to live with their father, Craig. Then, in 1991, the 27-year-old divorcee met 30-year-old Jimmy Martinez.
We met at a bar in Phoenix, and he walked up and said, "I'm gonna marry you and move you to Texas." And so 2 weeks later, I was gone.
Celeste and Jimmy settled in Austin, Texas, but it didn't take long for problems to arise in Celeste's marriage to husband number 3.
Before long, he found out that the credit card bills were going up, and it caused friction in the relationship.
Through interviews with Celeste's children and those who knew her, Casey discovered that when things got tough, Celeste would threaten to commit suicide.
There was the time when she tried to jump out of the car in the middle of the freeway, and Jimmy grabbed her by the arm. She reported him to the police, saying that it was domestic abuse.
While still married to Jimmy in 1993, 30-year-old Celeste took a job as a waitress at the exclusive Austin Country Club.
It's where everyone, and especially the old money in Austin's society, that's where they hang out.
One of its members was 69-year-old Stephen Beard, who had recently sold his share of a local television station, making him worth an estimated $15 million. He had 3 adult children in their 40s.
He was a big, gregarious man, demanding, but I guess what attracted me to him was his wife had a stroke, and he would bring her in and he would be feeding her scotch, and I mean, it would just be running down her chin. To me, that showed how much he loved her. Eventually, she died in October of '93, and I went up to him and I gave him a hug. And he told me later on that that hug meant so much to him.
Just imagine if you're Celeste Beard, you're a waitress working for tips, and all of a sudden you see this lonely, old, very wealthy man who just wants companionship. Mr. Beard probably thought it was the greatest thing in the world.
So 10 days later, we started dating, and I moved in with him by Christmas. When we went into the clothing store, you know, he picked me out a shirt. It was like $600. And then the first jewelry he gave me was like a 3-carat diamond ring and a 42 diamond cocktail ring. I mean, he just lavished me with all this stuff.
Shortly after moving in with Stephen, Celeste filed for divorce from Jimmy Martinez, and in February of 1995, married Stephen Beard. Despite the near 40-year age difference, to some, the two seemed like a perfect match.
You couldn't help but like Celeste. She had a great sense of humor and a nice laugh. She was easily amused.
He found a woman who could make him happy and that he wanted to shower attention on.
But the honeymoon wouldn't last long. When Women Behind Bars continues.
She became obsessed with me.
Celeste asked Tracy to kill Steve. She said, "If you don't, I will kill myself." And Tracy agreed to kill Steve to save Celeste's life.
When 32-year-old Celeste married 71-year-old Stephen Beard in February of 1995, her life suddenly felt like a dream come true.
He just put me on this pedestal, and I never felt like that before with somebody. I felt safe with him.
She saw his bankroll. She saw the money. He was able to give her the life she thought she deserved.
But problems began to crop up almost immediately. Celeste claimed Stephen still wasn't over the death of his ex-wife, Elise.
We were living in the mansion that he lived with Elise. Everywhere I looked, you know, with my hair, everything, I felt like he was trying to turn me into her. And I didn't want to be her, I wanted to be me.
After less than 5 months of marriage, the couple filed for divorce. But within a week, they reconciled, and Stephen made plans to build a brand new mansion and lake house for Celeste. He also agreed to help her regain custody of her 13-year-old daughters.
The whole deal was, if I married him, he had to get my kids back. I wanted to make sure that no matter what, my kids were set for the rest of their life.
Stephen funded a costly legal battle, and Celeste was eventually granted custody of her daughters. He also gave Celeste $500,000 to spend as she wished.
Her closet was as big as most people's living rooms. She had a shoe collection that rivaled Imelda Marcos.
I think 1 6-month period, she went through $500,000. The rate it was going, she would have bankrupted him.
Despite his generosity, according to Celeste, life with Stephen Beard became increasingly unbearable.
All I had to do was be there at 5 o'clock when it was cocktail hour, and we would have to sit sometimes till 10 o'clock, and just our whole life revolved around cocktail hour, and it drove me crazy.
They were both pretty volatile people. She was a compulsive spender. Stephen had some issues. He drank very heavily.
I would always use the divorce card because I had been married so many times. He knew that I would walk.
But Celeste never did walk. For one thing, she'd signed a strict prenuptial agreement.
He was in love with Celeste, but he was a businessman and he understood money. If they divorced during the first 3 years of the marriage, she got nothing besides her personal property. If she was married to him at the time that he died, well, then Celeste was the primary beneficiary of the trust.
In the spring of 1999, after a confrontation with Stephen over money, Celeste threatened suicide and admitted herself to St. David's Pavilion, a psychiatric hospital in central Austin.
She goes to St. David's and basically she's got friends coming over and having pizzas delivered. It's like a party. But while there, she strikes up this friendship with Tracy Tarleton.
According to authorities, Tracy was an alcoholic who was suffering from serious depression and had recently tried to commit suicide.
There was this pathetic lump of a person that my heart just went out to her.
Tracy was at a low point in her life. She was truly someone who had lived a horrific childhood. She'd gone to St. David's because she was drinking again and she'd become seriously suicidal.
Celeste Beard gave every indication to Tracy Tarleton that Celeste Beard wanted to be in a sexual relationship with Tracy Tarleton.
Before long, there were kind of stolen kisses and little romantic embraces. Somebody walked in one day and found Tracy giving Celeste a back rub. Celeste had her shirt off on the bed.
She soon fell in love with Celeste Beard, just like many people who have come in contact with her did.
Celeste insists the relationship was strictly platonic and denies any kind of sexual contact with Tracy.
I really loved her as a friend. I didn't care that she was a lesbian. I had just finally found somebody that I could talk to.
The two women then went to another institution called Timberlawn together and actually lived together as outpatients at the end of their stay there. They became lovers.
According to testimony, the affair continued after Celeste's release in the summer of 1999, a relationship which Celeste says had evolved into a one-sided obsession.
She became obsessed with me. It finally escalated at my kids' graduation party at the end of August.
Photos show Celeste dancing with Tracy and sitting on her lap. Later on, someone found the two in bed together.
Celeste ate a lot of marijuana brownies and drank a lot of straight vodka. Did sex occur between them? I think it did. But I think it did in times when Celeste was so out of it she didn't realize it.
In the fall of 1999, Celeste's husband discovered the two women kissing during a dinner party at the Beard mansion.
What finally happened was that Stephen Beard kicked Tracy out of their house, told her never to come back.
Tracy Tarleton would later testify to a very different version of her relationship with Celeste.
Celeste Beard was telling Tracy Tarleton, I'm in this very, very bad marriage. I don't want to be there. So she was always talking about committing suicide, about hurting herself.
Stephen determined to take Celeste on a worldwide tour. They would be gone for months.
He told quite a few people that this trip was a test to see if he and Celeste could get along together. If this didn't work out, the implication was there that he would go forward with a divorce.
Prosecutors theorized Celeste feared that Stephen would divorce her, cutting off access to his funds. So in order to maintain her lavish lifestyle, Celeste needed to stay married. But life with Stephen had become intolerable.
So because of having to spend time with a person who she was telling everybody disgusted her, she decided that something had to be done quickly. She was not willing to take another extended trip with her husband.
She asked Tracy to shoot and kill Steve for her. Tracy balked, didn't want to do it. Celeste said, "If you don't, I will die. I will kill myself." And Tracy agreed to kill Steve to save Celeste's life. In order to get Steve Beard's money, she needed him dead.
In the early hours of October 2nd, 1999, the Travis County Sheriff's Department received a 911 call from the Beard mansion.
Location of emergency.
I need an ambulance, hurry.
What is going on there?
My gut just jumped out of my stomach.
Out of your...
They blew out. Yeah, they blew out of my stomach.
Rookie Alan Howard was dispatched to the scene.
I go to the left side of the house, and I can see him laying in bed. He's got a phone in his hand, it's covered in blood, and he's literally holding his intestines in his hand. I take an expandable baton and actually break out that glass door. This time I've been joined by one of the medics, and it does not look good at this time. And he points out a shotgun shell to me. And at that point, everything changes. The light finally goes off while we have a shooting.
When Women Behind Bars continues, a scheming wife tries to get away with murder.
She started screaming, "What happened to my husband? What happened to my husband?" Over and over and over, "What happened to my husband?"
And later in this episode of Women Behind Bars, a middle-aged mother claims her friend forced her to take part in a fatal beating.
When that gun comes out, you don't play games with her. She snapped, and I wasn't gonna mess with a crazy person.
In the early morning hours of October 2nd, 1999, a deputy responding to an emergency call at a mansion in southwest Austin discovered that a wealthy 74-year-old, Stephen Beard, had been shot in the stomach. It first appeared to be a burglary gone awry. When his much younger wife Celeste emerged, the plot began to thicken.
She started screaming, "What happened to my husband? What happened to my husband?" Over and over and over. It's not, where is he going? Is he in danger of dying? Is there anything I can do?
With some deputies, she was almost hysterical, but with other deputies, she seemed almost giddy.
According to reports, that wasn't the only thing strange about Celeste's behavior.
It was suspicious that she had not heard the shotgun being fired. It was suspicious that there was clearly a scene set up there to make it appear that a burglary had occurred.
While Stephen Beard was rushed to the hospital, the police wasted no time in interviewing Celeste's daughters. One had been in the Beard house that night, and the other had been staying with her boyfriend at the family's lake house.
A name that immediately comes up is Tracy Tarleton. And they go to Tracy Tarleton's home, and she admits to them that she does own a shotgun, and that shotgun turns out to be the shotgun from which the bullet that injured Mr. Beard was fired from.
6 days later, Tracy Tarleton was arrested and charged with injury to an elderly person. She quickly posted the $25,000 bail and remained free for more than a year. As the weeks wore on, investigators became convinced that Celeste Beard was somehow involved and that her primary motive was to inherit her husband's fortune.
They zeroed in on Celeste because Celeste was acting so oddly. She put a sign up on the door banning the police from going in to interview him.
He didn't want to talk to the police. He just wanted to put everything behind us.
Critically injured, Stephen was taken by life flight to a local hospital. He underwent emergency surgery but was stabilized after several days. Evidence shows that while her husband was in the hospital, Celeste remained in constant contact with Tracy Tarleton.
At times he was very close to death, but he hung in there and he improved, and over a period of months continued to get stronger. In January, he's finally released from the hospital.
Just one day after his release, Stephen Beard was readmitted to the hospital for complications relating to his injuries. In a matter of days, the 75-year-old was dead.
For a long time, it looked like it would just be Tracy Tarleton who'd go down for this. She was indicted first for the shooting, and then, after Steve died, for the murder.
There was this lesbian relationship going on between Celeste Beard and Tracy Tarleton. And the only thing that stood between her and Celeste Beard getting together was Stephen Beard.
But Tarleton would find out differently.
Tracy Tarleton happened to read a newspaper one day that had a wedding announcement in it. And it was a wedding between Celeste Beard and her new husband. At that point, Tracy Tarleton realized there was no relationship between her and Celeste Beard.
In February of 2001, Tarleton was formally charged with capital murder. She was arrested and held on $500,000 bail. In March 2002, while still in jail and awaiting trial, Tarleton finally agreed to cooperate. She told prosecutors Celeste convinced her to enter the Beard home in the middle of the night and shoot Stephen as he slept.
Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Tracy drove to the Beard mansion. She got out of the car. The door was unlocked as Celeste had told her that it would be. She walked into the bedroom, stood at the foot of the bed, saw Steve sleeping in the bed, put her gun up, took a deep breath, and pulled the trigger.
Meanwhile, Celeste's relationship with her twin daughters had deteriorated due to her irrational behavior following Stephen's death. Just before their 18th birthday, Stephen had legally adopted the twins, naming them as partial heirs to his estate. After his death, the twins joined Stephen's natural children in a lawsuit to regain control of Stephen's estate from Celeste to keep their mother from spending the Beard fortune.
They saw her on the day of his funeral practically celebrating his death, laughing about him having died.
On March 29, 2002, Celeste was arrested and indicted for the murder of her husband, Stephen Beard. Opening arguments in her trial were presented the following February.
The prosecutors did a pretty good job of showing was that she definitely moved into the starting to plot Stephen's death the night that Stephen witnessed the Celeste Beard and Tracy Tarleton kiss.
She's willing to enter into a lesbian relationship in order to manipulate that person into killing her husband.
Dick DeGuerin argues for Celeste that Tracy Tarleton is just plumb crazy, that this woman is an aggressive, predatory lesbian who has gone after Celeste.
Tracy is an evil person. She's really as close as someone can be to being a homicidal maniac.
Prosecutors then presented testimony from a woman named Donna Goodson, who claimed that Celeste paid her to hire a hitman to kill Tracy Tarleton in 2000, after Stephen's murder.
Tracy is the one who can really pull it all together and give the complete picture. It all really hung on her testimony. If she came off as unbelievable on the stand, the prosecutors would not win.
Prosecutors did a good job of showing that Celeste Beard went through a lot of pains to strike up a close personal relationship with Tracy Tarleton, and that she was doing this with the thought in mind of using Tracy Tarleton. In the end, a jury believed that Celeste used Tracy to get rid of Stephen Beard.
When the verdict was read, and I looked over at Celeste, and she had this lost, quizzical look in her face as she didn't understand.
Celeste Johnson, who is serving her sentence at a maximum security prison in Texas, has a message for her 27-year-old twin daughters, whose testimony helped put her away for life.
I would tell them that I love them, and I hope that someday that they'll be able to forgive me for whatever I've done to make them turn on me like this. And I'm sorry, but I don't feel like it's right either that I have to live here for the rest of my life for a crime that they know that I did not commit.
In accordance with his will, Stephen Beard's estate was divided between his 3 biological children and Celeste's twin daughters.
I just keep thinking that the truth is going to come out and that I'm going to be able to walk out of here with all these life lessons that I've learned and live my life different, be a better person.
Next up on Women Behind Bars, a mentally impaired man is allegedly abused and beaten to death by a gang of 6, led by 2 older women.
She was hitting him, and she wouldn't feed him and let him eat. And I told her, you can't do that, he's a human being.
For more information on Women Behind Bars, go to www.wetv.com. On August 26, 1998, police found the body of a 59-year-old mentally handicapped man, Buddy Musso, in a ditch on the side of a road. At first, the authorities could not ID the victim because the injuries were so extensive.
His body was beaten literally from the top of his head to his toes.
Investigators were led to a gang of 6, including 54-year-old Bernice Ahrens and the ringleader, Suzanne Basso. Bernice claimed she was forced to participate, while police believed she was a willing accomplice to the other woman.
Suzanne used a lot of manipulation and threats to get these folks to do what she wanted. They all said they were scared of what she might do to them if they did not comply with her orders.
Was Bernice Ahrens a willing participant in Buddy Musso's sadistic death? Or was she forced to follow the orders of her domineering friend? "51-year-old Bernice Ahrens was a lonely, widowed mother of 2 living in Houston, Texas, with her 25-year-old son Craig and 22-year-old daughter Hope. She had never had any brushes with the law.
Bernice Ahrens was a middle-aged woman with 2 adult children, Craig and Hope. She had a job, had an apartment, she lived with her children. Both Craig and Hope were slow.
In 1995, Bernice met Suzanne Basso, a 41-year-old security guard for apartment complexes and businesses.
I worked in the Harris County marriage license and DBA office, and she came in as a customer, and I helped her. We got to talking, and she asked me to go to dinner that evening, and I went. I was just wanting friendship.
Suzanne and Bernice became fast friends.
She was always warm and friendly and helpful, and if I needed to go someplace, if I needed some extra money, if I didn't have, she would, she was a person I thought I could count on.
But Suzanne also had a mysterious past.
She just had a lot of aliases, a lot of identifications. I don't know that anybody truly really knew her or what she was about because she tried to be somebody else all the time.
In July 1997, a few years after meeting Bernice, Suzanne traveled to New Jersey to visit friends and met cognitively impaired Louis "Buddy" Musso at a church bazaar.
Buddy Musso was a 59-year-old man who probably had the mindset of an 8-year-old. He was mentally challenged. Lived in Cliffside Park, New Jersey, at an assisted living facility. Everyone in the assisted living facility just loved him.
Suzanne, I think, targeted him. Honed right in on him, saw him alone, saw him by himself, started communicating with him by phone and by letters.
He got very smitten with her, and they started this so-called relationship where he saved up money to buy her an engagement ring, and he was saving up his money to come to Texas.
Buddy wanted to be loved. He wanted to be part of a family. And I believe that Suzanne told him that that's what was going to happen if he moved to Houston.
He bought a Greyhound bus ticket, had bought some cowboy boots and a shirt and a necktie, and got on the bus and headed for Texas.
In June 1998, Buddy moved to San Jacinto, Texas to live with 44-year-old Suzanne Basso and her developmentally delayed 23-year-old son, James O'Malley.
When Buddy arrived in Texas, his dreams of having a wife and a family never materialized. He was living with Suzanne Basso in a rental home and basically lived a life of servitude. She had him carry groceries, take out the trash, do all the grunt work.
She took him away from his support system, and so was able to have her will with him at that point in time.
According to court testimony, Suzanne started to abuse Buddy as soon as he arrived in Texas.
She beat him many times for not doing what she wanted him to do.
Soon after his arrival, Suzanne introduced Buddy to Bernice.
When she told me that she met him in New York, that he was a friend of her son's, and he was gonna come and live with them. And I was surprised, you know, that I thought he had a family. Why come here?
Meanwhile, Suzanne immediately laid claim to Buddy's assets.
She typed up a last will and testament for Buddy, which Bernice Aaron signed, as well as some of the other kids signed as witnesses, that upon Buddy's death, all of his property would go to Suzanne. One of the provisions in it is that Suzanne Basso is to get all of the insurance policies that I have and all of the money that is to be in the policies. No one else is to get a cent from it.
Bernice claims Suzanne forced her to sign the will as a witness.
One day she made me sign something, and I don't know what it was, but she says, "You gotta sign this," and I didn't even read it.
14 months after Buddy had moved to Texas, 44-year-old Suzanne brought Buddy and her son James to stay at Bernice's apartment, saying she had a leak in her home. According to Bernice's statement to police, Buddy was in bad shape when they arrived.
She says that Suzanne brought Buddy over to her house Friday. He had 2 black eyes, several cuts on the back of his head. Buddy would sit on the mat in the hallway and pick his head where he had cuts and make it bleed, and it would make Suzanne mad, and she would beat him with anything that was handy. She hit him with a belt, hands, a wooden bird, anything she had.
Bernice didn't call the police. Instead, she allowed Suzanne, Buddy, and James to move into her home that she shared with her adult children, Craig and Hope Aarons, and Hope's fiancé, Terrence Singleton.
And I said yes. And that was the wrong thing to do. That was the wrong thing to do, because that's when everything happened.
Bernice claims that Suzanne took over immediately after moving in. She claimed that Suzanne brandished a gun to control the situation.
Every time she would leave the apartment, she would have one of my kids with her. I could have got the cops and said something, but I didn't know what she would do with my kids. I wasn't going to take that chance. When that gun comes out, you don't play games with her.
According to the testimony of each participant, the group, including the adult children, became involved in beating and torturing Buddy right away.
You know, their mom's there, and so they were going to do what their mom wanted them to do, and again, we're involved that way.
The abuse continued round the clock for the next 4 days.
They all took part. Each one, whether they slapped him, they kicked him, they hit him with the bat, hit him with the vacuum cleaner attachment, dumped him in the tub. All of the torture that he endured was at the hands of all 6. All of them took part in one way or another.
I believe that it was very easy for Suzanne to lead them. She was the ringleader of the group, and because of their slowness, and probably because they wanted to please her, they participated in what she began.
We were scared of her, of one person that had that gun, that mighty gun that could have done a lot of damage. I was scared, and the kids followed my lead.
Buddy was such a sweet soul, and I don't think he really fought back. And so they had an open field to abuse him at will under Suzanne's direction and consent.
The punishments kept getting worse and worse and worse. I think at some point they just didn't even see him as a human being.
This was a primitive, tribal, animalistic act that was so far removed from the social norms that it's difficult to conceive.
Bernice claims she was either at work or away from her home during most of the beatings. But police allege that Bernice didn't just watch, she actually took part in the brutality. In her statement to police at the time of her arrest, Bernice admitted to participating in the abuse, although now she claims having no recollection of it.
I don't remember this. I don't remember saying any of this. What do you want me to say? I don't remember it.
There wasn't any person there that was strong enough to prevent this from happening or to say, hey, we shouldn't do this.
She was hitting him, and she wouldn't let him eat. And I told her, I says, you can't do that. He's a human being. What are you doing? And she says to me, you shut up.
4 days after Suzanne, Buddy and her son had moved into Bernice's apartment, Suzanne went to the police to claim that Buddy had disappeared.
She tried to set up a defense for herself. She called the family and told them that Buddy was missing and that he had possibly run away with a little Spanish lady that he had met at the washateria, which was a complete lie. And she also made a police report saying that he was missing.
At 10:15 p.m. on Tuesday, August 25, 1998, after 5 days of vicious beatings, Buddy Musso received a fatal blow in the bathroom of Bernice Aaron's apartment.
They administered their final beating of him, including scratching him with a wire brush on his body and pouring ammonia or bleach or Ponsol in his wounds and dumping him in the bathtub, where he eventually died.
In her statement to the police, Bernice claimed that she was in the house when Buddy died, but passively waited for Suzanne to orchestrate the disposal of the body.
She told the boys to get him dressed, that we would have to get rid of the body. And I says, no, we're calling 911. She says, no, we're getting rid of the body.
And that's when they put clothes on him. They put shoes on the wrong foot, put him in the trunk of the car, drove him to a remote area, and dumped his body out on the side of the road.
When Women Behind Bars continues.
The medical examiner described a person who just slowly was beaten to death.
After suffering weeks of abuse, 59-year-old Buddy Musso was tortured and killed by 6 accomplices, including 54-year-old Bernice Aarons. On August 26, 1998, the day after he was killed, a jogger discovered Musso's brutalized body in a ditch on the side of a road.
The victim had been severely beaten. We knew we had a homicide. The first thing that we noticed was that with the extent of the injuries of him, that the body had on clean clothes, very few blood stains. He had one shoe on it, and it was on the wrong foot. There was no identification on the body at all.
Well, at that point, I'd called the dispatcher and had her check for missing persons. And she notified us that a lady had reported a missing person.
They were able to put the 2 and 2 together and recognize that the person that was found in the field was in fact the person that was reported missing by Suzanne.
I went to the address of the lady that reported that particular person missing and made contact with her.
Chief Pruitt drove Suzanne Basso and her son James to the crime scene.
I stopped the car back beyond the other side of the bridge and got out with James O'Malley and walked him up to about where he could see the victim, Buddy Musso, and asked him if that in fact was Buddy. And he immediately confirmed that it was Buddy.
Under questioning, James O'Malley, Suzanne's son, confessed that they had killed Buddy, but Suzanne insisted she was innocent.
She just broke down, and she went into her, it's not my fault, they did this and they did that, and I told her, I said, well, your son just confessed of everybody's involvement in this.
O'Malley also named Bernice Aarons and her 2 adult children, Hope and Craig, in his confession. Later on, police searched Bernice's apartment and questioned her, her kids, and her daughter's fiancé, Terrence Singleton.
We knew that they were probably involved. We detained them, and then we started safeguarding evidence.
When the cops came, I breathed like a sign of relief, like I'm glad it's over. It's over and I'm glad.
The 6 accomplices were booked in the Harris County Jail and charged with capital murder.
I was in so much shock, just being there. because I've never gotten into any kind of trouble before, and I never was in a courtroom or anything, so I didn't know what to expect. And I just sitting there like a dummy.
We tried her for capital murder, and we were seeking a life sentence for capital murder. I think that Bernice was willing to do whatever Suzanne asked. I don't know if it was just for the friendship or the fact that Bernice was just kind of lonely and looking for somebody, you know, just to sort of give her positive feedback. I don't know.
Bernice's defense attorney argued that her role in the crime was minor and blamed Suzanne Basso. He claimed that Suzanne had masterminded the murder in order to get money from Buddy's insurance policies, of which Suzanne was the sole beneficiary.
Everybody's defense primarily pointed to Suzanne Basso as the ringleader, and she was. Bernice had a full-time job, so her part was, well, you know, I was working. How can I know what's going on when I'm at work?
All I know is that one day I went to work and I came home and the house was empty, and then they all started coming in. She says, Buddy's dead.
But the prosecution argued that Bernice knew about the abuse and participated. They presented as evidence a typewritten, signed copy of Bernice's verbal confession at the time of her arrest, in which she admitted to some culpability.
It was clear that Suzanne was the one in charge, and Bernice was willing to do her bidding. They tried to argue that they were just present. The law says that merely being present doesn't make you responsible for a crime. They were all willing and active participants, and as a result of all of them acting together, this man died.
The cornerstone of the prosecution's case were photos and testimony, which proved that Musso had suffered greatly.
The autopsy photographs were extremely important in this case because that was our case, to show how badly that man had been beaten.
The medical examiner described a person who just slowly was beaten to death. The jury found Bernice Aarons guilty of murder, and they gave her 80 years in the Texas Department of Corrections.
I was in total shock because I didn't do it. I kept saying, I didn't do it, I didn't do it. And I felt that, all right, if I was in the house when it happened, which I was, I'm admitting that, at least I could have been charged with an accessory or something, but not for the crime. I didn't do the crime.
I was glad that the jury gave Bernice 80 years because that's a lot of time, and I thought that was appropriate for her actions.
Bernice's children were also found guilty. 26-year-old Craig was sentenced to 60 years. 23-year-old Hope got 20 years for a plea bargain where she confessed to murder and testified in Suzanne's trial against her. Suzanne was found guilty and convicted of capital murder on August 27, 1999. The jury also convicted James O'Malley and Terrence Singleton of capital murder. They were sentenced to life in prison.
Suzanne Basso was tried for the capital murder of Buddy Musso. We sought the death penalty, and the jury ultimately sentenced Suzanne Basso to death for that crime.
Suzanne is a death row inmate at a medical facility in a maximum security prison.
I don't believe in the death penalty, but that's one person that I believe should get the death penalty. For ruining other people's lives, yes.
In 2002, Bernice was transferred to a maximum security prison in Marlin, Texas, the same facility where her daughter Hope is serving her sentence. She sees her daughter once a week. Bernice maintains her innocence, but does regret her actions.
If I didn't open up my house to her, none of this would have happened. And I blame myself for the whole thing.